much for having me. I'm excited to be back with you. It's been a long time since I've spoken to this group, probably 6 or 8 years, and I've been off doing some other things, which I'll tell you about. So, by way of getting started, I want to I want to just offer you this. Each of you in your work, whether you're doing consulting or you're employed by somebody, what you're essentially doing is transforming ideas into action. You are alchemists. You produce value. Um, and that's a pretty amazing thing to do. And it's something that really before not that long ago wasn't something that people really could do. And you are, perhaps you're uh, saving money for a hospital, maybe you're helping a business create a product. Either way, it's creating jobs, it's creating values, and it's a pretty amazing thing. However, unless the work you're doing is a passion project or for a charity, the alchemy doesn't come free. Time, money, and attention are all on the line, and that means risk. And risk means tension. And if you're not sure what I mean by tension, go ahead and take a deep breath, inhale, hold it, and then count to 5 before you let it out. And that feeling that you feel while you're holding the breath, that's tension. It's a physiological sensation. It's part of the fight or flight response. And used well, that tension can spur creativity. It can spur innovation. It can help move things, or it can cause anxiety and gum up the works and halt projects in the tracks and cause real problems. So I have a story to get us started. And before I do, I just want to say, if you have questions throughout or comments, feel free to 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 ask questions, to suggest things. I'm really interested in this being more of a conversation than a lecture. But let's start with a story. For New Year's 2000, as the world was trying to determine whether the Y2K bug was going to blow everything up, I went with uh, 10 friends who were all graduate school psychology students to a 5-day fish festival in Big Cypress National Forest in the Everglades of Florida. Fish being the band, uh, the jam band in the lineage maybe of the Grateful Dead, but very different than them. And I had never seen them before. And the experience of the show was amazing. I had never experienced this kind of music or this kind of show, and it was really amazing. And I've been a lifelong fan ever since. And the reason I would have to say has everything to do with tension and release. So the whole experience of even getting to the show was filled with tension. This was located about 75 miles north of Miami, off of Alligator Alley, I-75. And the highway and the reservation really wasn't equipped for 80,000 fans to turn off the highway onto a one-lane dirt forest road into uh, a reservation. And so the traffic was backed up for hours. And um, the band used that experience of the tension of the people getting there to releasing it in the first show and then building it back up again in the second show and then releasing it. And they did 4 shows over 5 days. And they culminated with um, New Year's Eve 2000 with the song Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Don't know that I'm pronouncing that right. Somebody who speaks German might be able to give it to me better, but it's the one you guys all know from 2001 that goes bum 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 ba bum 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 bum. So they like built up this tension all through the several days and sort of played the audience and the music in this collective tension and release. And I was hooked. So I'm going to play a clip of music for you now. Some of you may have listened to it ahead of time. And I don't play this clip of music hoping that any of you will become Fish fans, because people who like Fish either really like them, or if they've not been to a live show, people think, oh, it's just a jam band, it's just like the Grateful Dead, but it's really not. And it has everything to do with tension and release. So I'm going to play a clip for you. It's about a minute and a half, and about half of that is people cheering. And so I want you to ask yourself and think, why are they cheering? And assuming our tests have worked well, you are going to be able to hear this. Please let me know if you can't. Okay, I'm not hearing it. So when it's done, please tell me. Are you guys hearing it? Are you hearing me? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, it just ended.
And we heard
Oh,
cheer.
good. It did. Oh, great. Okay, thank you. So, so let me ask you, why are they cheering? What do you guys think? Why were they cheering?
Well, I'm guessing that they might have be somewhat familiar with the song, and but it paused, and they were waiting for the rest of that to occur. But they knew what was coming, right?
They did know what was coming. Some of those people had heard it before. But even without that, there is something happening in the music. What specifically happened? Did you catch it?
I thought it was because he was acknowledging the crowd by looking around.
I think it was, but I think what happens in that song is he is opening a phrase but not finishing it. And in that gap is tension. So here's what he was doing. He was going da 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 da. So that's the full phrase. But what he did in this piece of music is he went ya da 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 ya da 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 da. So he didn't resolve the phrase. And by not resolving the phrase, he created tension. And in the audio clip I sent you guys of Trey Anastasio teaching a guitar class from about 15 years ago, he talks very specifically about the fact that in their music, they try to take people on a journey. And the way you take people on a journey with music is by building tension and releasing it. And you can do it just like that without, there are certain notes in the musical scale that build tension and there's certain that release it. So if you know the song Doe, a deer, a female deer, from The Sound of Music, the doe is the root note and that resolves tension. And some of the other notes build tension. And so very often what you'll hear a band do is end back on that root note, and because it resolves the tension. You will find tension and release all through art and music and film. Take, for example, um, the difference between the movie Gladiator. So in the movie Gladiator, the Caesar, I mean, there's tension all through this film, right from the beginning. If you guys haven't seen it, it's about a guy who was a general, becomes a slave, becomes a gladiator, and then redeems Rome. But in this scene, the Caesar holds up his hand, and if his thumb goes up, the gladiator lives. If his thumb goes down, the gladiator dies. So in that one scene, there's tension and there's release. Throughout the whole movie, there's the tension built and built and built, and at the end, they release it by him. Spoiler, but it was 15 years ago, killing the Caesar, who was a bad person, but then doesn't get fully redeemed because he ends up dying anyway. Compare that to something like Paddington Bear. There's no tension there. It's all about, warm and fuzzy. The focal point is directly in the center. It's all right there. Look at the difference again between something like a Jackson Pollock painting, where your eye has nothing really to land on. It's constantly moving. And so there's tension being built all through this. And compare that to a motivational poster. There's no tension there. It's warm and fuzzy. It's there's one line that's right there on the rule of thirds. The cat is right there in the middle.
Hey, Don, sorry to interrupt. Did you want to be sharing your screen right now? Because you haven't been.
I have not been sharing my screen.
No.
Oh my goodness. Yes, I do want to be sharing my screen. Well, which is why I couldn't hear it. Okay. Well, so let me go back a little bit.
Echo. Just echo.
Echo now.
Okay.
Say something?
Yeah, I'm still getting an echo. Oh, we did all this testing. I'm sorry, guys. Let me see.
See?
That tension you were talking about.
Now we lost the audio.
Now you're mute.
Yep. I'm here. I don't lose
Yeah.
audio. Don't worry. We'll get this worked out.
Yeah.
Sorry for your recording, but
It's resolving now.
yes, it is resolving now. So if I start speaking, you're going to get an echo. But what I will do is I'm going to just move off of loopback, and I'm going to use this. And then when I share my screen, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Do you still have an echo?
No.
Good. Okay. So consider the difference between the movie Gladiator, right? Where the Caesar has his hand in.
There is echo, actually.
Okay. One last try.
Did other people hear the echo as well?
Is the echo gone now?
I think so.
Yep, it's gone.
All right. Great. Okay. So consider the movie Gladiator versus the movie Paddington Bear, right? In Gladiator, there's, the whole premise is, does this person live or die? And you don't really know throughout the movie what's going to happen. Compare that to something like some of the early Marvel films, where the superheroes, in the setup of the film that the superhero always wins. There's no tension there at all. Some of the more recent ones have been better, like WandaVision was amazing because you didn't really know what was going to happen. But some of the original early Marvel films from the last 4 or 5 years, you always knew who was going to win, so it wasn't nearly as exciting. Consider a Jackson Pollock painting, which is, gives you nothing to land your eye on. It gives you your eyes constantly moving. And whereas, some compositions might use the rule of thirds, he's all over the place. Compare that to a motivational poster. Nancy Duarte, in her amazing TED Talk on what makes a great presentation, looked at Joseph Campbell's hero journey. And in the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell outlines that there is a likable hero in an ordinary world who has a call to adventure. Here's a call to adventure. The world goes out of balance. At first, they're resistant. They're like, I can't do it. I don't want to do it. And then along comes a mentor and helps the hero move from the ordinary world to the special world. And Nancy Duarte makes the point of saying that when speakers are giving a presentation, they're not Luke. They're not the hero. Their role is really to be Yoda, is to help the person who's taking the journey move from what is to what can be. So she mapped out the structure of amazing presentations, and she went back and forth between what is and what can be, and what is and what can be. And if you look at this graph, what you see is that those gaps are really the tension. So I was thinking about sharing another little bit of video, but maybe I'll just talk through it because the audio was giving me a hard time. So if you think about Steve Jobs' original iPhone announcement, he says, today we're introducing three things: a internet communication device, a widescreen iPod, and a phone. It's three different things, but it's really not three different things. It's one thing. So he sets up what is. There's three different objects: a widescreen communication device, a personal phone, and an internet communicator. So what is there's three things. What can be is one thing. What is all of the competition that has phones out there already has phones with QWERTY keyboards on them. What can be is a sleek glass touch phone. So it goes back and forth between what is and what can be. And she looked at the presentations of people like Steve Jobs and Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream speech, and she found this predictable structure in all of the best presentations. What is and what can be. And the role of the presenter is to help take the listener on the journey between what is and what can be.
An iPod.
And really that's our role as well, as developers, as product managers, as salespeople. We have to take people on that journey. So Carl Rogers, back in about 50 years ago, came up with a stages of change theory that modern psychologists, J.O. Porchenka and Carlo Di Clemente, have added to. And it basically says that people go through a series of stages when they're thinking about changing something: pre-contemplation, contemplation, determination, then action, then maintenance, and then termination. And you can see that represented in this graphic. Somebody says, I'm not planning to quit. They're talking about smoking. I'm thinking about quitting, but I'm not sure. I'm planning to quit in the next month. I've quit for 24 hours. I've quit for more than 6 months. And so as you go through that process from pre-contemplation, contemplation, determination, action, and then maintenance, each of those gaps is tension and resolution. If there's no tension, there's no forward motion. The tension is required to move things forward. And if you think about the way a sailboat works, a sailboat is an airfoil that creates low pressure on one side and high pressure on the other side, and the sailboat moves to equalize the pressure. It's the same way salt moves through the diffusion and osmosis process inside food. When you salt your food, the reason you do that is to draw out some of the water and to equalize the amount of salt throughout the meat. It's the same thing. Tension helps create forward motion. If you use the tension well, you can change the world. So here's how I see this working in a sales process. You talk to the people who are hiring you, and you find out about the problems and the pain points in their lives, right? You take that and you tell a story for them that puts them in the position of the hero. The story allows them to immerse themselves in the idea of a better future, to move in their head from what is to what can be. What is, at TechServe, when I worked for TechServe many years ago with Tony White, the payment routines were such a problem that they could not add more than one credit card processor that they had already. What could be was a new flexible system that would allow them to add different credit cards, different credit card processors, different kinds of terminals. What is to what can be. That tension creates forward motion. But that forward motion is uncomfortable. You felt it before when you were holding that deep breath. It's uncomfortable. You want to get to a place of resolution. And so people in the system will do things to try to equalize that pressure. And there are really two ways that can happen. One is they can make the change, and the other is they can do something to create homeostasis. Homeostasis being the concept from psychology, from family therapy, where if you think about a family being or a workplace being a system, and like there's a air conditioning set temperature where when it gets too cold, the temperature clicks on to bring down the temperature or make it warmer. When it gets too hot, the set turns on to bring the temperature back up. It's the same thing in families, and it's the same thing in businesses and systems. If something is causing tension and promoting forward motion, people will find that scary, and something in the system will do something to try to reduce that pressure. And so the two choices are either to make the purchase and move forward, or to find a way to decide not to do it and move away from it. In each stage in the process, you can do things to increase or reduce the tension. If there's no tension, there's no forward motion. If you have just enough tension, you can get into the state of flow, and you can get into a shared state of flow, where, flow being that state where when you're doing something that's at the upper level of your ability level, so it requires your attention and your concentration, but not so hard that there's overwhelming anxiety. Time stops, thought stops, and it's just pure experience. And research has found that people that spend more time in flow live happier, longer, more productive lives. If you have too much tension, it gets to be intense anxiety, and it can bog everybody and everything up. So I want to point it out to you. I want you to see it, and I want to encourage you to use it well, because if you use it well, you can change the world. So what I want to do now is walk through each of the stages of the sale and development process. And I want to ask you questions, and I'd like to engage you guys in a conversation about, first off, how do you define productive tension? What do you see are the hallmarks of productive tension? How do you know when you've got that?
I would say, this is Vince, I would say that when the client starts to engage in conversations with you about what they feel could be better, I think that's where they're participating and they're seeing some opportunities there. So they're engaging.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Anybody else have a different option that they think about?
I got the same option. It's the engagement, I think, which equals productivity. When you have a client who maybe didn't know FileMaker before, and they're engaged in a debate or discussion, which always has a little bit of attention if you're sorting out different points of view, but they're engaged in that, and it's productive because they're talking about the project, they're talking about FileMaker. So it's kind of echoing what Vince said.
Yeah, cool. I agree. What about unproductive tension? How do you know when you see that?
Oh, I guess when you have great disappointments along the way, whereas instead of actually providing the a promise of solution and meeting that, on some sort of schedule, that they come along and they actually use the product, and it's like, oh, hey, there's, maybe it's doing what it's supposed to, but there's all these other glitches and things that are happening, and it's stressing them out, making them think it's not going to work when we get to the end.
So when people start doubting whether they're going to get out of this alive,
Yeah.
right? Whether this is going to have been a good investment, whether it's going to work out well, and everybody starts to worry. What happens in those cases? What happens when everybody starts to worry?
Start looking for alternatives, or
They start looking for what they can do. Homeostasis kicks in. what can they do to get out of it? And is like start evaluating the sunk costs and is it worth to keep going? And then as you guys start feeling the tension, the development team has a harder time delivering and it gums everybody up, right? So let let's take a look at each of the stages. So let's talk about who's feeling it in the sales process. And I want you to think about it from each, if you really think about there's the person who's the buyer, there's the person who's the seller, there's the person who's doing the implementation, and then maybe other people as well, the people who are using the thing that the person who's, the purchaser at the client has created. So in the sales process, which of those people would be feeling the tension?
Buyer?
The buyer is feeling tension, sure. Why are they feeling tension?
Well, if it's a large sum of money, they're definitely concerned that this is gonna happen, and
Yep.
it's gonna deliver value far greater than the value that they're spending on, hopefully.
Yes. What about the person selling? Are they feeling any tension?
Oh yeah.
What do you what's what's the person selling feeling? Like what's causing their tension?
Well, I don't know. I've been through many of these conversations, but it's sometimes it's like, it's kind of like getting into a relationship, right? You meet somebody and it's like you're not quite sure like how how they communicate and how they like what it's going to be like living with them, and then you realize like, oh my God, they're horrible communicators and I just don't know what's going to happen. And like you have an expectation going in that like, you know, you you kind of get a sense of like, okay, if I can communicate with you, we can get this done.
Yeah,
But I've been in situations where like, you know, they have a workflow, but they can't even talk about how that workflow works, like, and all of a sudden it's like, how am I ever going to get this thing built if I can't even understand how that thing works? Yeah.
totally. And what could you do in this situation in the sales process to intensify the tension?
To intensify the what? The
Yeah,
tension?
if you wanted to intensify the tension in the sales process, what could you do?
Uh,
Positive
Say that again?
tension.
Well, whether it's positive or negative, let's say you want to intensify the tension. Seth Godin says that tension is absolutely required in marketing and sales. Without tension, people don't make any change. People are comfortable in where they are, and that tension, marketing is culture change, and the culture change requires tension to move people forward.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and
So,
build on top of Vince's example where he says that, if you're coming across a customer who doesn't even know how their system works, well, that should be scary, right? I mean, it's like, well, what if it breaks? Then you don't, how do you're not going to know where it broke at. You're not going to know how to fix it. So that's something that we can help fix, right? If we start talking about that now and provide a system that's maybe a little simpler or easier for you to understand, then
yep.
you can get out of this danger that you're already in.
So one way to intensify the tension is to really point out the difference between what is and what can be. There are other ways that unethical marketers, I think, will build tension by doing things like, sign today, for a 10% discount, or, my calendar is being booked up quickly. Like there are things you can do to intensify the tension. What could you do during the sales process to bring it down if you wanted?
I'm going to go with lower expectations because I'm going to break it down just following on what was said before, positive tension and negative tension. The kind of tension that I'd want to avoid is the negative tension that would result from overpromising, and then you're like constantly struggling to deliver at that expectation. The positive tension that I'd look for is instead of pain, I'd look for excitement. try and
Yeah.
maintain excitement about what the possibilities are. By talking about what their business could be, their organization could be, and or providing lots and lots of visual examples of other successes without violating an NDA.
Yeah. So I want to suggest to you something that I did for a long time in my consulting that really helped both intensify the the forward moving tension, but also decrease the anxiety tension, which was if I was working with a client, if a client had approached me for something that I thought was going to be a year of work or even more than that, and they asked me what it was going to cost, I would never give them the price. I'd never say it's going to take a year, and I would never give them the price of a full year's worth of work. What I would say is, I don't really know right at the beginning. It's a pretty big thing. It's fairly unknown. And so what I like to do is I start out with all my clients by selling a fixed bid 1 week discovery process. It's a little bit less. I charge a little bit less than the time actually cost me, but I want to get to know you. I want to see if we're a good fit together. And and so because it's fixed bid, I can spend as much time with them as possible. Nobody's looking at the clock. And so I interview everybody I possibly can to find out about the problems that they're facing, how they manifest, what's going on with them. And then at the end of that, I produce a report that says, here's everything that I see. Here's how I would prioritize this work. Here's how I chunk this. And then you've got a report that says this is going to take us a year or more, but we can start on this 2-month thing. And so I try to reduce the tension by, giving them a much lower cost of entry and a much lower risk way to try with me, but then build the long-term tension because it really paints a picture of what could be if we went down that road together, but gives them a way they could incrementally take those steps without buying the whole thing all at once. Has any of you guys do that? And do you find that helps?
Yeah, I just if I could just show them, well, Harry, let's take one thing that might save you some time and make things faster and easier for you. Not worry about everything that you're thinking about, but start with one thing. Say, well, and figure out, well, how much time would this save you? How much, how many errors would this, resolve if you could just do this one thing and get them excited about that. Then you can start going through that cycle you were talking about, because I mean, like that TED Talk you were mentioning, is that it's a cycle where you would go through that process multiple times and not just try to do everything in one big lump, one big tension, and one big resolution.
Yep.
Is not really the way to go, probably, right?
So let's talk about the sales and development process. So, if you think about it as somebody comes to an awareness of pain, they consider the problem, they make a purchase, you do your work and you deliver and they get satisfaction. But what happens if, instead they get their awareness of pain, they do the consideration, they make a purchase, and then you go away for 3 months and they don't hear from you or longer, right? So what's happening in their mind in that process? Even if it's just, 3 weeks, what's happening in their mind after you've, made the purchase but then gone away because you started work?
To the Bahamas.
Right. So what are they thinking and feeling?
They're not going to get what they paid for.
Yes. Yes. So I would suggest to you that the ideal thing is you have to then continue to build and release tension all through the process. And it has to be for everyone, not just for your clients. The tension is important for the developers also. If there's no tension, right, and there's no incentive to get this thing done, what's to stop somebody from going to sit on the beach for 2 weeks or, sitting around and watching, the, all of the Star Wars episodes in machete order? Like, there's no tension, there's no forward motion. So, so once you've signed and you're getting close to a kickoff, then who's feeling it? So if you think about the salespeople, the client, we've talked about the client a little bit, but what's happening with the person who's sold it and the development team? Who's feeling it there?
Uh,
You got to
as,
deliver,
as,
right?
yeah, you have to deliver.
You have to deliver, right?
Mm.
So what would intensify your tension at this point?
Added complexity that was unforeseen that comes in, and
Yes.
how to manage that.
Yep.
Not getting
Changing
paid.
staff.
Changing staff. Yeah. So how can you intensify it, and how do you intensify it to get the team psyched so that there's forward energy to really get things going?
Okay, I'm gonna go with convey enthusiasm. Depending on the team, often I find myself working with like someone out of college, and if we're doing a FileMaker project that's sort of enterprise level, I always point out that this is a terrific learning opportunity. Just try and build enthusiasm all over the place for the work at hand.
Yeah, totally. So in my work now, I'm doing very little FileMaker. I'm working as an enterprise product manager. So when I left doing FileMaker projects about 5 years ago, I got hired by ADP, and I was doing, large scale, um, work for ADP. So building a platform that we were using to build applications in for HR and payroll and that kind of thing. Now I'm working for a financial tech firm. But in both cases, I'm working as a product manager. The people I'm selling to and are, you know, CEOs, CTOs, all of those crowd, and they're selling to VCs. So there's tension all through that process. And I'm working with a team of engineers and a couple of designers, and everybody on the team is feeling we've got to make this work. We've promised that we can do this. We have to deliver it. So here's some things that I do and that have worked for me, may or may not work for you, but I'll just share them. The first thing is, being very clear in the kickoff as to who's the team and what are the roles, and painting a vision for those people who may not have been in the sales process as to what we're doing and why we're doing it, and how important it is and how it will help the business, the community, whoever you're serving to achieve their goals, and getting everybody very excited about the vision, like you said, Tony. The other things we can do at this point is declare exactly what you're not going to do as a way of decreasing the tension. So when I worked at ADP, one of the projects we worked on was replacing the style sheet system, uh, that we were using when we started. And you can sort of think of like FileMakers building applications for small businesses. We were building a platform to build applications for enterprise businesses. So we were replacing the styling system and the styling components. And this was going to be a year-long project that we knew was going to take a couple of teams of work and have a long testing period. And things were going to come up all along the way in that year that people were going to say, well, we need this and we need this. And so we had to draw a line in the sand to say, here's what we're not going to do. We're not going to do anything that's going to impact the runtime experience of the people using the legacy system, the developers doing that. We're going to not do anything that's going to require the person who's developing with our platform to have to choose either to use the old system or the new system. And we're not going to introduce any new non-essential functionality for that year other than the styling system that we were doing. And so that's going to create tension in itself. So we created a whole bunch of post-launch epics. I find, though it's sometimes highly ritualized and maybe too ritualized, using the Agile framework is helpful in managing the tension and creating a cycle that helps both relieve and create tension at different points. So we created epics, which were rolls of stories that listed all the things that we weren't going to do. One of the things that you can do in the planning phase to reduce detention is to separate engineering from construction. Very often, we're all doers. You get an idea and you want to jump right into it. But if you can separate out the how we're going to do it from what we're going to do it, that can also help reduce the tension. And the other thing is, Vince, you mentioned, unknown complexity. So one of the things that I always try to do is spike the known unknowns. Do you guys know the word spike? Is that a familiar term?
Like a railroad spike?
Well, so in the Agile framework, one of the things that we do, even if it's only a team of few people, we try to estimate how long a story is going to take. And when we are writing out the story that we have to implement, we will sometimes say, you know what, I don't know how we're going to do this. And so we'll do a spike. And in the Agile framework, a spike is a time-boxed investigation to reduce risk. And the term comes really from rock climbing, which I do a lot of. I've never used pitons like this, but when people first blaze a trail in rock climbing, what they would do early on is they would hammer a spike into the rock to create a fixed route that people that were following after could follow. And so the spikes are about reducing uncertainty and reducing risk. And so when we were doing that styling sheet project, we created a number of spikes. So we were replacing Blueprint CSS and a bunch of off-the-shelf styling components and creating our own set. And so we had to find all of the dependencies that were there, and we had to find out how we were going to consolidate all of the styling systems, and we had to identify all the Lego margins and paddings. These were all things that were unknown. So we carved out probably 10 different spikes that we were doing before we started our initial development work. And we did those even during the plan phase before we had our full-on plan, because we just didn't know what was going to be there. The other thing that's really hard to do is you set really clear milestones. Like for this project, we said in Q1 we were going to create the style sheet. In the second quarter, we were going to create the form layout and interaction controls. In the third quarter, we were going to have 2 project teams that had completed testing of it. In the fourth quarter, we were going to get into production. But part of what that depended on was being able to say that meant that we had to buffer the unknown unknowns, because there's always stuff that you don't know that comes up that spikes the tension and anxiety through the roof. And so when we were making our plan, we did our best estimate of what everything was going to take. We did as many spikes as we could to come down, and then we left a 30% buffer. And that's really, really hard to do when you're selling a consulting project to a client. But it's really important to do when you're figuring out your estimates, not to sell yourself short, not to overpromise, because there's always, there's always something that comes up that you just don't know. And so these are all things that I've tried to do in the planning process to reduce my anxiety and also to reduce my clients' anxieties, because they ask me questions about how long is it going to take, and I'll say, I don't know, but here are the things that we're doing to figure it out. Here's how we've, here are the things that were unknown that we're going to, do short little investigations on to figure out, and then we're going to buffer, some time at the end because there are things that we just don't know. And having that plan, helps reduce everybody's tension by, keeping it contained and planned. Does anybody have thoughts or see things that I'm missing, or does it trigger any thoughts for you?
And the term spike, that's interesting. It's the first time I've heard it. And it's helpful to see it in the way you describe it. I would say, isn't that just another term for milestones?
It's different than a milestone, because if you think about what we were doing, like we did these spikes actually before this. I have a slide that has it. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, so this slide, right? So we do those spikes. I try to think about the difference in the process between design and planning, engineering, construction, preparing to launch, and launch. And I think about the spikes as coming in the planning process and in the engineering process. It's almost before the kickoff of the project. And the idea is I can't really make a plan that I can have any faith in unless I've done the best I can to identify how are we going to build this thing? What are the things that we just don't know yet? And you know, I mean, and so it's our way of dialing down complexity, and you can do it in big projects like this, or today, you know, what I'm working on right now. I'm working for this financial tech firm, and one of the things I'm responsible for is the identity work stream, the who can get into a system and what they're allowed to do there. So the things like when you log into a website, the username and password and the secure sign-on, and then once you're in, what are the permissions that the people who, you know, the people who can access it and what they're allowed to have access to. One of the things that we were working on was, you know, we want all of the traffic that interacts with our website to be private traffic behind our firewall, except for right where people log in and use their username and password to get into the system. But there was, you know, there was one process that we were looking at that we couldn't, the architecture wasn't working to support what we wanted. And so there was a real unknown as to, we knew what the goal was, but we didn't know how to do it. And so rather than just write a story that says, you know, bring this part of the system behind private traffic, we set up a spike that we thought of as, you know, one person, you know, 2 days, time boxed, to investigate the various ways that you could do that, propose an approach, propose an architecture, and then once we did that, we would write a story on how we would implement it. Does that make sense? So it's different than the milestone. It might be something that you do even before you set up the milestones, or if it's in with the milestones, it's a way you can time box the unknown part of it before you commit to an approach.
Okay.
So, okay. So tension during the development process. Who's feeling it?
The devs feel it. The manager feels that. The architect feels it. I think sometimes in different ways.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
again, we're going back to your example, which is interesting because sometimes, like, you embark again, and using your metaphor of the spikes too, like you're gonna climb this wall, but you know, maybe you're the first one going up and you got to figure out where the spike is going to go so that you can lay the path for the people coming after you, you know, like, so you have confidence that I mean, you've done this before, you can figure it out, and you have confidence in your team and they can figure it out. So it's a little bit, I don't know, sometimes I think when I do something on my own, I only get so far, but when I have a team, I feel like, wow, okay, like I'm off the project. I'm not thinking about it, but my team came up with an idea that encourages me to move it forward. And now I have a
Yeah.
different insight. And now it's like all of a sudden, you know, like the juices kick
Totally.
in and it's like, oh, I get it now. I get how
Totally.
to solve it.
So you mentioned confidence, which was a perfect setup from the next slide. This graph I first saw in the book Change by Design by Tim Brown, who started IDEO. And he talks about the fact that at the beginning of any project, your confidence is really high. But as the project goes on and you encounter unknowns, what happens most often, particularly in a design project, but also in a custom software build, is you get into this place where your confidence drops the longer you go and you're not sure how you're going to get out of it and how you're not sure how you're going to solve it. And so it's, you know, time is on the bottom, confidence is on the left, and you can see that there's this gap. And it feels like this. You start out, you feel like you're skating across the project. And then you get into the middle of it and you're like, I just don't know how I'm going to get out of this. And you start to flounder your way up the wall, and then eventually you can pull yourself out. And so that's often what will happen if you don't do that architecture or the planning at the beginning and try to figure out what the unknowns are. You can get into the middle of it and it's really confusing. When I started at ADP, I had a project where, just like in FileMaker, there's a table Lego, and we were building a table Lego to use for enterprise apps. And when we started, the project was to replace the underlying engine that supported this table so that it would be rendered correctly. And this first project, we didn't really separate the engineering from the architecture and from the construction. And we started out all buoyant, we were getting into it, and then about 2 months in of what was supposed to be a 3-month project, one of my engineers came to me and said, the architecture's not quite right. I think we need to change it. So we went back to the drawing board. And then midway in, somebody said to me, hey, we're planning to do the styling system improvement on this as well. Maybe we should do that at the same time. And I said, oh, okay, that's a good idea. But then we had, engine bugs and styling bugs. And we just didn't know how we were going to get out of this. And so it felt horrible, which is why I started to think a whole lot more about this process. If you think about the tension resolution during the development process, there are a couple things that you can build in that really help keep everybody's tension and release going in waves where it's productive. So the first thing that I have found that's really helpful, because I'm on teams that are really funded by larger organizations and need sort of organized structures, I've started to really use the agile development process. And I used it when I was doing consulting, but it's become much more formalized now. And I've actually found it very helpful, because here's what happens. We will, we'll plan a 3-month quarter of here's the things we're going to do in this quarter. And so when I was doing my consulting, I do about 2-month, iterations. But within that, we break them up into 2-week sprint cycles. We start each one with a planning session. We say, here's our overall plan. Here's where we are in the plan. Here's what we're hoping to get done in this next 2 weeks. Here are the things that we're going to do in that. Here's the reason we're doing it. Here's the vision. And so we get everybody excited. Then we go and we do our work. And then at the end of the 2 weeks, we do a release. And even if it's just, even if it's, and when we do that release, we push our code out and we call it, this little bit is done, and we celebrate this little thing that we've done. And then we do a demo to our stakeholders. And we write release notes. And then we do planning again. And the reason that's also helpful is if you think about what your clients are feeling in terms of the tension and what your developers are feeling in terms of the tension. So I'm on this authorization and authentication, really back-end platform services that the CEO and the CTO don't really know anything about. They don't really understand it. And the VCs don't know anything about it, and they don't really understand it. And so if we don't ever release and don't write release notes and don't tell them about it, it's like it doesn't happen. But they know they're paying for the team, and they can't quite understand why. So even if we're releasing back-end stuff, we have to put together a demo and do a release note that explains what we've done in a way that the people who are paying for it can really understand it. And it takes a lot of work to do that, to translate, what switching from Cognito as an identity provider to Okta as an identity provider, why you would do that and how it's helpful, and what the benefit of that is, and what secure sign-on is, and what it looks like when somebody signs in with a username and password versus just their Office 365 credentials. And so translating what we've done over the last 2 weeks into actionable things that the people who are paying for it can understand helps alleviate their anxiety, helps alleviate their tension, gets them excited. And you have to You have to continue to sell the project through the project, because every couple weeks they're reevaluating. Every time they get a new set of bills, they're thinking about what are they spending money on. And if they haven't heard anything out of those developers that are off in their cave working, they start wondering why they're spending this money and if it's going to ever pay off and is it going to be worth it. So introducing a demo and a release note on a cadence helps alleviate their tension. It also helps create forward motion for the development team, because the developers at the end of a 2-week period are like, hey, we just finished a battle. We got through this thing. It was kind of complex. We're not sure how we did it. There's more to do, but we can stop for a minute, take a breather, and celebrate that we did it. And that's awesome. And then we can replan. So having some sort of cadence, whether it's Agile or Scrum or Lean or some internal system that you build, but having a cadence where everybody comes together and you communicate what you're working on, and you celebrate your win, and all of that can help alleviate the tension that can block you up. It can help create the tension that helps move you forward, and it keeps shifting the cathexis of energy back and forth from the people that are paying for it to the people that are doing it, and in a way that's really helpful. Anybody have any thoughts or comments on that?
I like celebrations. I think they're very, very important, because after people make a big push, there's people are tired, and every now and then a lot of people are willing to celebrate, but a lot of times it's like, whoa, 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 stop, not so fast. Like, just even if it's just a moment, just celebrate, because it gives you energy for the next climb up the mountain, the next hill.
Yeah, totally. I didn't do this quite so formally when I was consulting, but I still did it. I tended to have regular meetings that I would schedule once a week or twice a week with my clients. And so I would make sure I had a meeting on the calendar every 2 weeks so I could see them, communicate what we had done, demo for them. Even if it wasn't done, but I wanted them to see forward progress. And you don't have to show them the code, because they don't really want to see the code, but they want to see that things are changing and it's getting better and it's moving towards, and so maybe it's showing them, hey, we estimated that we've got these 15 things to do. We've now completed 2. We've now completed 3. We've now completed 5. We had these 12 bugs and we've now resolved 3 of them. Like, just giving them things that show them that this forward motion is really helpful for relieving their tension, but also creating forward tension. So, and then you get to tension prior to launch and release. And so now you get a new party in who's going to start feeling tension. And that's the people who are, in every organization that you guys work with, there's the people who hire you, and then there's all of the associated workers who have to adopt what you've created for them, right? And so they're going to be feeling tension because you're bringing a change. You're doing something that might disrupt the world. There have been very big companies that have gone out of business, like Fortune 500 companies have gone out of business after a botched software release. And so most of the time that's not what's on the line, but people feel this very real. Like, they have muscle memory, they have habits. You change their habits and it's bad. And so, so first of all, does that resonate with you guys?
Totally.
So how could you intensify the tension in those people?
I mean, not listening to them.
So that would
It's like they're
intensify
talking.
the unproductive tension. How
Yeah,
could you intensify the excitement
production.
tension? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Just
like every
getting something for them to use, small, even though it's small, to try and see that you're
Totally.
communicate with them and, like get their feedback and see that you're listening. It's kind of like going back to your example of like going away and not being responsive, like you're not there, So
Totally.
being,
Let them use the software, let them do user testing on it, give it to them, show them. Like at ADP when we were building the styling system, we did hackathons, we did bug bash sessions where we gave people gift cards for the people who could find the most bugs in the system. We let them try the new thing. We gave them a way they could, switch back and forth between the old and the new, and said, here's a $25 Amazon gift card to the people who find and report the most bugs. We spent time where we went to each user or each group of users and said, here's what you're going to see. We did a lot of demos showing, hey, this team just adopted the new thing and here's how it looks. Hey, this team adopted this new thing and they said this has increased their speed of development by 100%. We did a lot of providing guidance. We knew that enrolling at that new styling system in ADP was going to break a lot of people's applications. And there were things that they were going to have to do to adopt it. So we created a little application that described for them the things that they were going to need to do and how they could prepare for launch. And then we went and held their hands as they did it. And so we built their excitement by letting them play with it, by giving testimonials for how much faster it could be and how much better it could be. But we reduced their unproductive tension by pointing out to them and holding their hands around the adoption. And the last thing you never, ever, ever, ever want to say is read the fucking manual. Because that's just disrespectful and people will be angry about it. And, but it happens way too often. It's very common among some engineers to think, it's in the manual. Why do I need to explain this to them? Because people don't want to have to read the manual. They want the mental model to match their mental model, and they want to make sure it's easy to use. And that's where good usability comes in. That's where good design comes in. And then finally, the question is, how do you reduce the tension at launch? So launch and post-launch are often overlooked. And so I would suggest to you, one of the things that you should do is create a testing plan. As part of your initial planning, go through and make a list of scenarios for yourself and all the things that could go wrong. Identify all the people or groups who would be impacted by each thing that went wrong. Think about and talk about the ways you can mitigate the risk in each scenario and prioritize those mitigation strategies. And then do the same thing with creating a launch plan. Answer for yourself, who's going to be impacted by what you're changing? And how could you scaffold the change for them? So scaffolding is a term that comes from learning theory. And what it means is if you think about building scaffolds around a house, right? You put up a framework to help people to be able to climb up. In teaching, the idea of scaffolding is that when a child is learning, you first do it for them, and then you help them, and then you stand back and watch them but support them, and then you let them do it fully on their own, and then they just don't need you. And so scaffolding in software adoption is the same way. And you can think about scaffolding physically in being there with them, and you can think about scaffolding in your UI. Like, when you first launch something, provide, help and videos and in-app, where you can popovers and things that in the context of the UI that provide them the guidance they need, but then provide the ability to fade that away as they learn it. And so figure out who's going to be impacted by your change, how can you scaffold the change for them, and how can you build their tension and excitement through the launch. And then you have to just and every step along the way, resell it. There is tension at any point in the act of creation. It's there. It's always there. And if you can see it, if you can pay attention, if you can notice it, you can take steps to mitigate the tension that is unproductive, that will stop things. But you can figure out how to create the tension, in your clients, in your team, in yourself, that will push things forward. And so I want to encourage you to think about it. Pay attention to it, because it's there, and if you can see it and then you can use it, it's amazing. So thank you. I'd be happy to take any questions or thoughts that you guys have.
Thanks, Don.
Well, one of the first things that occurred to me when looking at this and listening to what you were talking about, it's like, well, there's occasions where I could just go, ta-da, here it is, it's all done, and like, well, of course, I just eliminated all the tension, right, if I do something like that. But then, of course, then the temptation would be to, well, let's deliver it in little bits and pieces, and like artificially create tension that wasn't maybe not necessary, but might actually help sell what I'm doing better. So I imagine there's a balance where you like, is it ethical to create artificial tension when it's not needed, when you could just like, well, it's like, because I've been accused of that too in the past, just because I'm an in-house developer, and like, and it's almost like it didn't work out very well for me. It's like, because I would surprise them with the work, and it was done a lot faster than they thought it would be. But then it's like after that happened, they kind of just wrote it off like, well, I guess that was no big. It wasn't a big deal to ask for it in the first place. Is I think the way they ended up taking it. Instead of like, oh wow, we can do this bigger, better, and faster by asking, Eric to do this, right? And so instead, it kind of like, well, I guess that wasn't really a big deal.
So yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And I want to latch onto two things that you said. One is that sometimes you create tension artificially. And if you look at what Steve Jobs did, I just read that Steve Jobs' superpower wasn't necessarily design or innovation. One of his superpowers was seduction. And part of what he's doing in every presentation is building tension and using that tension. And Apple does that all the time. But the thing that's really important about it is to figure out how to do it ethically, right? You want to do it so when you're changing culture, you can point out the difference between what is and what can be, but then you make it fully up to the user. You don't exert any necessarily pressure. You don't make yourself a guru, right? Because you can become that and you can position yourself as that, but then that would be, if you're manipulating people, if you're taking advantage of them, if you're offering something that's not fair value, then I would suggest to you that it's not ethical. But if you're doing something that you believe to actually make a difference and that brings value to them, and you're presenting the information and letting them choose, then that tension can really be helpful.
I had a friend in Arizona who is very talented and had a few clients, but he, actually the clients told me this story, and he said, we love working with him, and he just, we tell him what we need, and he does it, and it's a pleasure to work with him because he works so well. And I think the relationship that we have with our clients starts off as more like this thing where it's like how much is this going to cost, right? And so to me, that relationship is more like, I don't know you, I want to see how much this is going to cost, but eventually once you build a relationship or a rapport, and the conversation might be different a year later, where instead of asking you
Totally
like
agree.
how much, it's more like, when can you do it? It's not even like, I don't care, you're going to charge me ethically because
Yeah.
I trust you and the loyalty's there. etc. And that's, to me, that's where, like, I value a lot of our relationship building with our clients, to the point where it's like, you know, we're we have integrity in the process and what we do, and we're transparent and all this, so that because I absolutely hate estimating for projects, because it's like, you know, it's just
It's
so
hard to do.
complex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you brought it back to trust, because when we were at Pause last week in the middle of the presentation, Adam Aronson was sitting there, and I said, Adam, what do you sell? And he said, I sell trust and relationships, right? I mean, ultimately, if you do your job well, that's the best thing that you can do. And ultimately, you get to a place where it's a very natural cadence, and it's a trusting, and sometimes even loving relationship. Like it's a But and that trust is really important in the not taking advantage part and not using tension unethically. So I totally agree with you. And I don't want your takeaway from this to be that I'm suggesting that you create tension to manipulate people at all, because I'm not. I am suggesting that it is always there in any creation. You are transferring energy from somebody who has a need to somebody who can fulfill it, but in exchange you are exchanging money. So there is an exchange of value, there's an exchange of tension. Sigmund Freud called it a cathexis of attention. And so it's just always there. And so if you pay attention to it, you can use it in a way that helps change things. You can use it in a way that helps keep everybody motivated. You can prevent the things that slow everybody down and create that really nice balance.
Part of this is it's really going to be there no matter what, or could be, but maybe finding ways to pace it or to shape it so that it keeps people excited and interested rather than,
Totally.
yeah, the opposite.
And again, I would come back to flow. Like the concept of flow. Anybody here play music? Anybody go running? Anybody play sports? The runner's high that people describe. The magic of playing music collaboratively is that you get into a state of flow. And flow is that state where there's enough tension that you have to focus all of your energy on what you're doing, but not so much that it's debilitating. And when you can get into that magic zone, you get into a state called flow. And the research they've done has found that people that spend more time in flow live longer, happier, more productive lives. And so that's all about using tension creatively in the creative process to motivate you and move things forward. So that's it. I'm happy to stay and answer questions, or we can wrap. Thank you for your time and attention. I really appreciate it. It's nice to be with you guys again.
So if somebody here had questions like, well, how could I take this situation?
You can just email me for sure.
Yeah.
I'm happy to email me, call me. I think my email is my email in the invitation?
No.
So I'm just Don at drdonlevan.com. You're welcome to email me, and I'm happy to talk to you.
Wow, thanks.
Yep.
That's a pretty good offer.
Thank you, Don, because it's interesting. Sometimes we do these things naturally in some way, but don't think about it. Now it's opened my eyes up in a sense to I wouldn't say manipulate the situation, but it's more open my sense to understand that, you know, sometimes, just feeling like, okay, yeah, we'll some point I have confidence in my team, we'll get it resolved. And just this walking forward with the sense of confidence is even kind of reassuring to the client.
Yeah.
So anyway, really appreciate it, Tom. Thank you so
My
much.
pleasure. Nice to see you guys. Bye, everybody.